Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about OpenVPN. If you don't know what OpenVPN is or what VPNs are in general, VPN basically stands for like a virtual private network. It's a way to communicate to machines over the internet or through your local network by using the firewall. If you want to route to a different network, it lets you tunnel into that network because there's no other way to access that network. So in a nutshell, VPNs are just different ways to access different networks in a secure manner, and it's like an encrypted tunnel. So you can kind of like think of it as a subway, and the packets ride the train, and then you can't access the train because it's kind of protected in that tunnel. So think of a VPN as a tunnel like that. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to access the internet. We want to browse. We don't want the ISP to know what we're doing. We don't want other sites to know where we live, where we're coming from. So VPNs give you that sense of privacy and extra security of encrypting all your packets, and it just gives you a better way to browse the internet. And you can also use it based on location, so it can look like you're coming from a different city or state or even country if you really want to do that aspect. So we're going to go through the concepts of how to do that. And we're going to be using OpenVPN. So one thing to keep in mind with OpenVPN is there's two different sides to it. There's the community edition that's completely free, and then you have the business side, which is more of a drop-in server aspect with a nice GUI. If you wanted to deploy to Azure, there's an actual application there that you can deploy that will spin up the GUI side of it, and then you can log in and utilize that. I think it gives you 2 streams or 2 connections for free or something, and it has additional configuration settings and then it's nice little GUI for managing on a business side. But that side has a licensing fee. But you can also use a community side, which we will use, that will allow us to continue to deploy as many connections as we want. We can even give it to our family and friends, cases like that. So when you do a search, make sure you grab the community edition. You're going to want to use the community edition application on your desktop. You can use it for any platform. We're going to be doing Windows. And if you've not already, I'm on Medium. I've got a lot of different content that I post. And if you really want to follow this step by step, you can also go and find the Enhanced your security and privacy and how to deploy using OpenVPN, and I've got a nice little step-by-step guide here. But we're going to go through this step-by-step on this video. So first thing we want to do is we want to deploy a new server. You can use whatever you want, any type of location, company. It doesn't really quite matter. The only thing I would recommend is make sure that when you're deploying a server, you're going to want to make sure that you're using something recent. Anything AMD is going to be like an Epic or a Ryzen, which is going to have the instruction sets needed for doing your encryption, decryption. Intel will as well. Just keep in mind that a lot of providers like to use older E5s, which may or may not have the instruction sets needed to do the encryption and decryption. And the reason that matters is that's going to be your performance enhancement. So that gives the CPU an efficient way to encode and decode the packets with whatever encryption algorithm case might be. In this case, we're going to be using AES 256. So just make sure that the CPU has the proper instruction sets depending on the encryption that you're going to use. Otherwise, you're going to see a substantial drop in speed. And I have a 1 gig connection down, and I was using OpenVZ on an E5 that was a little outdated, and my throughput was 30 down. So you can see there's a big difference between a full gig down and I'm getting 3 megs down. So that's just something to keep in mind. But once I did upgrade to an AMD server, I think it was like a Ryzen 7 or something like that, I was instantly getting 700 down, which is like 70 megs out of the whole connection there. So just keep that in mind. If you do have any type of speed issues, consider upgrading your CPU, find a different CPU. Very rare cases will you find an issue in the virtualization side with the network driver that's being virtualized. In some cases that will affect your throughput and some VPN, but most of the time it's not going to happen. I've only seen that happen like once, and that was just a really specific situation. But either way, cloud compute here, high performance on AMD. Location doesn't really matter. Let's be a little different. Maybe we'll try let's do Dallas. We'll do Dallas. I use Debian a lot, but you can use any OS side you want. And you don't really need much. OpenVPN will run just fine with like one CPU, 1 gig of RAM. It's not really a memory user, so it's mostly CPU. But even then, even if you start maxing out your connections, you're probably never going to really hit the 100% unless you have multiple people streaming, 4K videos or something like that. We don't need backups. And we're just going to call this VPN1. Let's do a deploy. And we will let that run. So the next step too, once this deploys, is we're going to use an installation script. So I typically would just do like GitHub, OpenVPN installer. There's 2 different ones. So basically both of these are more or less the same. They've taken different approaches on how they want to do their installation. It doesn't really quite matter. The steps are more or less the same. One's going to be a faster installation. The other one's going to prompt you with, making more specific changes to the encryption settings. But either one's fine. It's all the same. So let's just go ahead and grab one. And they're just going to give you this simple, strings to copy and paste. So once the server is online, and we just go to server details, and we have the root CPU, I want the IP address. So we're going to grab the IP, bring up Kitty, say yes, login as root, I'm going to copy, paste, and we're in. First things I like to do is I just update the entire system. So I do an update, and then I'll do an upgrade. Just make sure everything is up to speed. And once we have everything there, we'll go ahead and grab the installation script. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in. Make this bigger. And then all you're really going to do is you want to make this executable, and then we can execute the script. It's going to ask for the IP address. Most likely you're just going to have the one. This is what you're going to be tunneling out of. IPv6 is optional if you really want to do it. I'm just not going to bother at this point in time. So port options, default for OpenVPN is going to be 1194 UDP. Things to keep in mind is UDP is going to be faster in performance. TCP is going to have the overhead because if you understand how the protocols work, TCP is going to want to double check the packets and make sure that it has not missed any. Compared to UDP, it's just going to keep on sending the packets until it stops. So those are 2 different concepts. Depending on what you're trying to do, may depend on which way you want to go with. Each one will have the pros and cons, but typically you want to stick with the UDP unless you really have a reason to go to TCP. In terms of ports, I know a lot of you are thinking, what if I did UDP 53 or TCP 443 using that encryption to kind of mimic and tunnel out of a firewall? So if the port is open, it will work. The thing you have to keep in mind is that if you're trying to tunnel out of a firewall or even a proxy that's doing DPI or deep packet inspection, it's going to evaluate the packets, and looking at the strings and the hex, it's going to realize that this is not what it says it is. So in some cases on networks that are just basically blocking ports going out, you can adjust and tunnel out. But in cases where they're doing DPI, it's a harder process. Just something to keep in mind that it does work. It's just you have to keep in mind of the situation that you're trying to tunnel out of. Similarly, these are the defaults. I'm just going to go with Cloudflare. Compression. I mean, in terms of the threat here, I don't think you're going to have an issue unless someone's specifically trying to attack you, or if you're like running a site-to-site connection that's just always running. But if you're typically just not using it for like a brief period of time or not really doing anything crazy sensitive, it's not a big deal. But compression's nice, so I'll just do it. The latest one. Now this is where you can customize your encryption settings. So if you want to increase the encryption, so you have like it becomes harder to crack, or if you have other specific reasons that you want to change it, you can. But specifically, the defaults are fine. There's not really a big issue with that, so I'm just going to leave that as is. So it's going to run through the installation. It's going to install the service. It's going to install all the other binaries, libraries. It's also going to install the configuration settings and make some changes as well. I'm just going to call this VPN 1. You can call it whatever you want. In terms of the password list or password, this is when you invoke or connect the VPN tunnel. If you add a password, it's going to ask you to type that in to authenticate, and then it's going to connect. So if you want an extra layer of, authentication, you can go that route. I typically don't really use that. I just want to be able to right click, connect, install, and that's what I do. So if we look here, we're going to see we have the VPN file right here, which we're going to use. I also want to point out that in terms of the location for the configs, they're all going to be here. So we have, the certificate authority, the key, the private key, the server key, all that's here. So you can use this on other different configurations for specific clients. So if you have like a firewall and you want to configure your firewall to connect to the VPN and then tunnel all your traffic through the firewall, through that tunnel and go out, you can. You can copy and paste and just pull the information from this server site here and then paste it all if need be. But we really just want the VPN for the actual user, so I'm just going to cat that out, and then this is the information that we need. If you ever wanted to change the VPN settings, maybe you want to change the port number, something like that, you can go here, you can just go to the server config, and you can just change the port and the protocol right here, and then just basically save the file and then restart the service. And then to make sure you change your client as well to adapt to that. So if we go back to the client, you can see that up here we have it going to UDP, the IP address of the server, and then the port number. So just make sure you change that as well, and you can always jump around and changing what port you're going to. So for the sake of this demo and on a Windows-based client, I just want to copy and paste this entire thing. So with that, I'm going to open up Notepad. You can use any text editor that you want. We just need to copy and paste this and use this as a profile. So copy, paste, save as. I want to make this I'll just call it profile, OVPN for OpenVPN, save it to the desktop. Okay, we have that. Now I've already installed the client. Once you install the client, it's going to be down here as the GUI. I'm going to do right click and I'm going to do import, and I'm going to import from file. So I'm going to go to desktop, I'm going to grab my profile, open that, import it, and then I'm going to go back to the client. And then if you have multiple VPN profiles, you're going to have them all listed here. If you only have one, then it's just going to be a simple right click to connect. But in this case I have multiple ones, so I'm going to grab the profile one I just created, I'm going to do connect. I'm going to let connect. If it does connect, alright, so I was a little on the weird side. It's working now. I don't know why I had a problem with taking that certificate. It eventually connected. Not quite sure why. Maybe it kind of weird. Probably a Windows thing. But going back here, I'm just going to do reconnect to it. And now it's working just fine. Probably just a Windows thing. But anyway, you should not get that. If you do, that's just let it run, and it seems like it went through just fine. Okay, so if I go here and I look at my IP address now, I can see that I'm at the 126. I am now based out of Dallas, Texas. So now I can actually do a lot of web browsing, and that's going to be seen as my location. So if we also do a, let's see, ping, you can see you gain a little bit on the latency side. Not too much, not too bad. Just keep that in mind that as you go further out, you're going to have more latency depending on the location you go to. So yeah, you want to keep it kind of close to home, just because you don't want to have to deal with 100 or 200 or even 1,000 on the latency side. But just something to keep in mind when you do deploy. But other than that, that's all there is to it in terms of deploying OpenVPN. So I hope that helps you and you have fun deploying your VPN servers and being able to connect wherever you want. If you like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it to your friends, family, your cat. Maybe your cat wants to, you know, go mouse hunting, dark alleyways, sell catnip, and be undetectable. So thanks again. Thanks for watching, everyone.